He told the officer his dog was in the military. The cop laughed in his face. But a few minutes later, that same cop was standing in complete silence, watching something he never thought was possible. Some people judge you before they even know your name. They hear your voice, see your skin, or look at your clothes, and decide you don't matter. That's exactly what happened to 10-year-old Jamal. He wasn't trying to be funny. He wasn't telling a story. He was telling the truth. But no one believed him. That is, until a dog showed up, and everything changed. Jamal wasn't just a quiet kid. He was the kind of child that the world often overlooked. Not because he wasn't smart, not because he wasn't kind, but because he was born in a place where being noticed usually meant trouble. And Jamal had learned early on, if you stay invisible, you stay safe. He lived on Myrtle Avenue, a street with more potholes than pavement, and more memories of gunshots than of laughter. The buildings were old and tired, like they were holding their breath, waiting for someone to care. Cracked windows were patched with cardboard. Porches leaned like crooked teeth. Streetlights flickered like they were arguing with the darkness. But inside one of those buildings, in a small apartment with thin walls and even thinner curtains, lived Jamal and his mother. His mother worked double shifts at the clinic downtown. Every day she left before sunrise and came home long after the stars had taken over the sky. She was exhausted, but she was loving. She made sure Jamal always had something warm to eat, even if she didn't. And then there was Duke. Duke was family. Jamal didn't remember the day Duke arrived, but he remembered the feeling. A man in a dark uniform had knocked on their door. No words were needed, just one long look between the man and Jamal's mom. She cried. Duke walked in, and from that moment, he never left Jamal's side. What most people didn't know, and what Jamal rarely talked about, was that Duke had once belonged to his uncle, Tony Rhodes. Tony was the kind of man kids admired. He was strong, sharp, and calm in the kind of way that made you feel safe just standing near him. He'd served in the special forces, deep undercover in dangerous places that Jamal's mom never talked about. All Jamal knew was that Uncle Tony was brave, and Duke had been right there with him. Together, they had survived ambushes, rescued hostages, and sniffed out explosives where no other team dared to go. But one mission had gone terribly wrong. A landmine, a flash, a scream. Tony didn't make it. Duke did. And somehow, even after that horror, Duke still protected. He didn't shut down. He didn't become aggressive or unstable. He carried that pain and turned it into purpose. Now he belonged to Jamal. But Duke wasn't the only one with scars. Jamal had his own. Every day, he walked the tightrope between staying invisible and trying to prove he mattered. Most kids his age talked loud, laughed louder, or got into trouble just to feel seen. But Jamal stayed small, polite, careful. Still, trouble had a way of finding him, like the day at the park. It was just supposed to be a normal afternoon. Jamal had taken Duke out for some air. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the broken basketball court. Teenagers were throwing bricks into a busted trash can, pretending it was a game. A couple sat smoking behind the swings. No one paid Jamal any mind. He liked it that way, until he saw the cop car. It was parked just outside the gate. Windows cracked, engine idling. An officer inside was sipping coffee, eyes scanning. Something about the moment felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the officer looked at Duke with suspicion. Jamal didn't want any trouble, but something in him, something deep, wanted to speak. Maybe he wanted to make his uncle proud. Maybe he wanted someone to know the truth about Duke. So, against his usual instinct, he walked over, hands visible, posture non-threatening, just like his mom had taught him. "Excuse me, sir," he said, standing a few feet away. The officer, mid-sip, barely turned. "Yeah." Jamal pointed to Duke, who was sitting perfectly still under the bench. "That's my dog. He was in the military, special forces." The pause was too long. Then came the laugh. It wasn't cruel, not at first, more like disbelief. "You serious?" the officer said, finally looking up. "That big mutt?" Jamal nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. He served with my uncle." The officer squinted. "Kid, I've been around service dogs. That thing looks like a house pet. You sure you're not making stuff up?" Jamal's cheeks burned, but he didn't flinch. "No, sir. My uncle passed away overseas. Duke was his partner. They served 3 years together." The officer shifted in his seat, suddenly less amused. "Dogs don't just come back from war and live in the projects, kid. That's not how it works." And that's when Jamal felt it, that heavy, familiar feeling, the one he couldn't name when he was younger, but now knew well, being doubted, being dismissed. He didn't argue. He just turned and walked away. He could feel the officer's stare, following him back to the bench. Duke stood up the second Jamal arrived. Not because he was called, but because he sensed the tension. Duke always knew. The truth was, Jamal was used to this. He'd heard teachers whisper that he was quiet, maybe too quiet. He'd watched neighbors cross the street when he walked Duke down the sidewalk, clutching their purses tighter. He'd seen other kids tease him when he tried to explain where Duke came from. Nobody believed him. Nobody wanted to believe him. The idea that a 10-year-old boy living in a low-income neighborhood could have a decorated war dog, it didn't fit their picture of the world. But that picture was broken. What they didn't see was the government paperwork tucked safely inside a manila envelope under Jamal's mattress. They didn't see the handwritten letter from Tony, sealed with a fingerprint, asking that Duke be sent to Jamal if anything happened. They didn't know that Duke still had his microchip, still had his Special Forces ID number tattooed in his ear, and still responded to military commands in 2 languages. They didn't know any of that because they didn't care to ask. They saw a boy and a dog. That's it. And that made every walk, every outing, every day just a little harder. Jamal carried the weight of his uncle's legacy on shoulders that were too small. He wanted to share it, but the world wouldn't listen. Until one day it had no choice. Jamal didn't talk much at school either. His teachers often said he was polite, but distant. He never interrupted. He finished his homework, but he rarely raised his hand. And when he did, it was usually to say something others didn't expect. Like the time the class was learning about veterans, and one kid raised their hand and said, "Dogs can't really be in the army, right?" Jamal had spoken up that day. "They can. My dog was." The class laughed. One kid muttered under his breath, "You wish." Even the teacher smiled awkwardly and said, "Well, some dogs do help soldiers, but I don't think they're exactly in the army." Jamal wanted to explain, wanted to tell them about Duke's time with the 75th Ranger Regiment, about the night ops, about how his uncle said Duke could sniff out a hidden IED under 6 inches of concrete. But instead, he just stayed quiet. Why bother? Everywhere he went, people already had their version of the truth. That his dog was just a pet, that his uncle was just another guy who died in war, that Jamal was just a quiet boy from a poor street. The only time he felt safe being completely himself was at home, lying on the floor beside Duke, listening to old cassette tapes his uncle had sent back from overseas. Sometimes he'd play one, close his eyes, and just listen. Duke took down the guy before I even gave the full command. "He's something else, Jamal. You're gonna love him." That voice, the one he'd never hear again, was the only one that truly believed in him. And every time he heard it, he promised himself, "I'll take care of Duke like you did. I won't let you down." But outside those walls, Jamal carried the burden alone. He carried it past the liquor store, where teenagers hung out too late, past the boarded-up library with graffiti that said, "We ain't invisible," past the crosswalk where a memorial still stood, candles melted to the concrete, a photo of a boy not much older than him, smiling like he didn't know what was coming. It was in that kind of world that Jamal had to explain his truth, to people who didn't want to hear it, to cops who saw him as a suspect before a student, to strangers who looked at Duke and saw a weapon, not a wounded warrior. And then came the next time it happened. Jamal was at the small bodega down the street, buying cereal and milk. Duke waited outside, like always, sitting, calm, alert. An older man walked in behind him and saw Duke through the glass. "That's your dog?" he asked, pulling a beer from the cooler. Jamal nodded. "Yeah, he looks dangerous." Jamal hesitated. "He's not. He's trained." "Oh yeah." The man chuckled. "Trained to do what? Bite little kids?" Jamal blinked. "No, sir. He served in the military." The man laughed like he'd heard the best joke all week. "In the military? Boy, please. You got that dog off Craigslist." Jamal didn't say anything else. He just paid for the cereal, took the change, walked out. Duke stood up the moment the door opened, like clockwork. As they walked home, Jamal gripped the plastic bag a little tighter. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of being called a liar. Tired of having to prove himself. Tired of the fact that no one saw what Duke really was. They didn't see how Duke flinched sometimes in his sleep, like he was still in that war zone. They didn't notice how he always walked with his back slightly arched, protecting Jamal's blind spots. They didn't understand that this wasn't just a cool dog. This was a soldier in retirement, a survivor, a brother. And Jamal, he wasn't just a kid with a story. He was a boy trying to carry on a legacy that was heavier than anyone realized. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the window and talk to Duke like he was talking to Uncle Tony. "I know they don't believe me," he'd whisper, "but I'll show them. Someday, they'll see you the way I do." And Duke, he would just sit beside him, ears forward, chest rising and falling steady like he was saying, "I got your back." Then came the day things changed. It started like every other Thursday. Jamal got dressed, walked Duke around the block, came home, ate toast with jelly, then grabbed his school bag. On the way out, he passed Miss Lorna, watering her flowers. She didn't say hello. At the end of the block, a patrol car slowed as it passed him, the same officer from the park. Their eyes met for a second. The officer didn't wave, just kept driving. By the time Jamal reached the school gates, the routine felt normal again, but something in the air felt off. The security guard who usually stood smiling near the entrance was gone. A janitor was arguing with a teacher near the side of the building. Kids were being rushed inside faster than usual, and that's when Jamal noticed him. A man, mid-30s, walking too fast, hoodie pulled tight, bag clutched close to his chest. At first, Jamal didn't think much of it. People always rushed past the school, some late for the bus, others just lost in thought. But this man wasn't rushing away. He was heading toward the school, eyes wide, movements sharp. He didn't fit, and Duke noticed too. He stood still, body stiff, tail low, ears perked. Jamal had seen that look before, when stray dogs tried to enter their block, when a neighbor's car got broken into. Duke never barked for no reason, but now he growled, low, deep, controlled. The man was now halfway to the entrance, and Jamal's heartbeat sped up. Then he saw it. The man reached into his bag, not a phone, not a notebook, something metal, black, and before Jamal could fully process it, Duke moved. The man didn't know what hit him. One moment he was striding toward the school gates, clutching his bag like it held his last breath. The next, Duke had already covered the 30-foot distance between them like a black flash of thunder. There was no barking, no growling, just pure, surgical motion. Jamal had barely whispered, "Go," and Duke launched, his muscles exploding into motion like a coiled spring snapping loose. The man saw the blur too late. He tried to yank something from his bag, but Duke was faster. With unbelievable force, Duke slammed into his leg, knocking the man off balance. In one fluid move, Duke's jaws locked onto the man's arm, not hard enough to cause permanent injury, but just enough to halt any action. It was precise, controlled, professional. The bag fell, and when it hit the pavement, the unmistakable clink of metal made Jamal's blood freeze. It wasn't just a hunch. It wasn't just a maybe. There really was something in that bag. A weapon. Duke held position, teeth locked, body unmoving. Screams erupted from every corner. A woman from a passing car slammed on the brakes and jumped out. A school staff member ran toward the entrance, yelling for lockdown. Kids were pulled back inside the building. Doors slammed. Sirens suddenly started to wail in the distance. And Jamal, he stood there, silent, chest pounding, frozen in the middle of the sidewalk. He wasn't scared for himself. He was scared for Duke. What if the police showed up and didn't ask questions? What if they saw a black boy and a black dog and nothing else? But then something happened that Jamal never expected. The same cop from the park, Sergeant Keller, arrived first on the scene. He screeched his cruiser to a halt, slammed the door, and drew his weapon in a single motion. "Get off him! Get off him!" Jamal shouted, his voice cracking through the chaos. "Duke, release!" Instantly, Duke let go and backed away 3 paces. Calm, steady, obedient. The man on the ground groaned, clutching his arm, unable to reach for anything. The weapon, a black semi-automatic handgun, lay inches from his hand, still untouched. Sergeant Keller's eyes flicked between the gun, the man, and Duke. His finger hesitated on the trigger. Seconds later, backup arrived. More officers, lights, radios buzzing. They cuffed the suspect, pulled him up, and shoved him into a squad car. The weapon was collected. The bag was taken in as evidence. And all the while, Duke just stood next to Jamal, like nothing had happened. A quiet hero, waiting for the next command. The rest of that day was a blur. Police tape wrapped around the entrance. Parents cried. Teachers hugged students. But the buzz, the thing everyone was whispering about, wasn't the near tragedy. It was the dog. People asked each other, "Did you see that German Shepherd? That thing moved like SWAT team." That kid, he said the dog used to be in the military. It didn't take long for the truth to start surfacing. The principal called Jamal and his mother into the office. An officer was already there, Sergeant Keller. His face was different this time. Not annoyed, not laughing, just serious. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, nodding toward Jamal's mom. "We owe your son and your dog a lot." Jamal's mom said nothing. She knew better than to trust apologies on the first try. Keller looked at Jamal. "You told me something a few weeks ago about Duke being in the Special Forces." Jamal nodded quietly. "I didn't believe you," Keller admitted. "But today that dog saved lives." He sat down, rubbing the back of his neck. I've never seen a civilian dog move like that. Not without panicking. Not without hesitation. Jamal opened his backpack and pulled out the envelope he never left home without. Inside, the picture, the paperwork, the letter from Uncle Tony. Keller took it with both hands. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Your uncle, he was the real deal. I served too. Iraq. I know what this kind of service means." He looked at Duke. "He's a soldier, just like any of us." Jamal didn't smile, but a small bit of warmth returned to his chest. For once, someone finally saw the truth. Over the next few days, word spread like wildfire. First the school, then the neighborhood, then the media. A local news crew came to interview Jamal and his mother. A reporter crouched next to Duke and said, "He doesn't even flinch near all this noise." Jamal just nodded. He's used to worse. A retired military officer saw the story and came forward to confirm Duke's background. "I trained alongside Duke," he told the news anchor. "That dog sniffed out 2 bombs in Kandahar. He saved our whole squad." Now people believed, but Jamal wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't trying to go viral. All he ever wanted was for people to stop laughing, to stop assuming, to just listen. But now that they were listening, it was a little overwhelming. His mom was proud but cautious. Reporters asked too many questions. Some even showed up uninvited, hoping to get a shot of Duke being aggressive. But Duke never gave them that. He stayed calm, poised, dignified, just like Uncle Tony taught him. One evening, Jamal sat with Duke in the hallway of their apartment. Lights off, just the two of them. He placed his hand on Duke's back and whispered, "We did it. They see you now." Duke turned his head and licked Jamal's wrist gently, then rested his chin on his lap. But with attention came questions. Why had Duke been allowed to retire into civilian life? Why hadn't anyone known sooner? Was it safe for a child to have a war-trained dog? Jamal's mom received a call from a federal handler who wanted to reassess the placement. She said no. Then came a second call, this time from someone higher up, an official with a government badge who offered to transfer Duke to a facility where he could live in comfort. This time, Jamal answered. "He already is in comfort," he said. "He's home." They didn't call back again. Still, the pressure didn't stop. Someone from the city's animal control office wanted to observe Duke's behavior. A stranger showed up at the school gates with a camera, asking students where Jamal lived. The principal increased security. Jamal was escorted to class. For a boy who used to be invisible, Jamal suddenly felt exposed, and he hated it. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to be the boy with the dog. He just wanted his life back. Then one morning, something changed. He woke up to a knock on the door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't reporters. It was Sergeant Keller again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man in a military uniform. An older man, tall, clean-cut. He smiled at Jamal. "You must be the kid my buddy Tony used to talk about." Jamal blinked. "You knew my uncle. I served with him, and I served with Duke." The man stepped forward, knelt down, and looked Duke in the eyes. "Hey, soldier," he whispered. "Long time." Duke's ears perked. His tail wagged once slow, but firm. "He remembers you," Jamal said. "Of course he does." The man smiled. "Once a team, always a team." He stood up and looked at Jamal. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you and Duke did, you carried on his legacy better than anyone could have hoped." Jamal didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a military medal. "Tony's. He wanted this to go to you." Jamal took it with shaking hands. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone had handed him proof of who he was. Not because he needed to prove it to others, but because it finally felt real. That night, Jamal hung the medal above his bed, and Duke, he slept under it, right where he belonged. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly. One day, things were quiet, too quiet. The buzz around Jamal and Duke had faded a bit. Reporters stopped calling. The school days started to feel normal again. Kids would high-five Jamal in the halls. Teachers asked about Duke during morning check-ins. But something was off. Jamal could feel it. Duke could too. He'd been restless, more alert than usual. At night, Duke would pace near the front door, ears twitching. Sometimes he'd growl low, deep in his throat. Not loud, not angry, just a warning Jamal had learned to listen to. One Thursday morning, the warning became something real. Jamal had just come back from the corner store. The air was cold, crisp, the kind that stings a little when you breathe in. Duke walked beside him, leash loose, body steady. They were almost home when Jamal saw it. A black SUV parked across the street from their building. He'd never seen it before. Tinted windows, no license plate, inside silhouettes, not moving, watching. Duke stopped walking. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood there, body tense. Jamal swallowed hard. They turned into the alley and used a back entrance to go up the stairs instead. He didn't say anything to his mom. He didn't want her to worry. But all day at school, the SUV stayed in his mind. By the time he got home, it was gone. But that night, the real test came. At 2:13 a.m., Jamal was jolted awake by a strange metallic click outside the window. His heart raced. At first, he thought he'd imagined it. Maybe it was a dream. But then Duke growled. And this time, it wasn't quiet. It was sharp, alert, the growl of a trained soldier who had sensed a threat. Jamal sat up in bed. "What is it, boy?" Duke was already at the window. Outside, shadows moved. Jamal's breath caught. Someone was outside their door. A soft tap, then silence. Duke didn't bark. Instead, he moved like he had back in the park. Slow, deliberate, precise. He crouched low and stared at the door, his head tilted, ears trained. Jamal crept forward. No lights, no sound. Then a faint scratching noise. Near the lock, someone was trying to pick it. Jamal grabbed his phone, hands trembling. He didn't call 911. He called Sergeant Keller directly. "Keller," came the groggy voice on the line. "As someone's outside our door," Jamal whispered, trying to break in. That snapped him awake. "Stay calm. I'm 2 minutes away. Don't open the door. Let Duke watch it." Jamal didn't need to be told. Then the knob turned. Once, twice, locked. Then boom, someone kicked the door. The entire apartment shook. Jamal's mom screamed from the bedroom, "Jamal!" But before Jamal could answer, the door gave way. It didn't open fully, but just enough for a hand to slip through, and Duke unleashed. He didn't wait. With a snarl Jamal had never heard before, Duke charged. A shadow yelped in pain. The door slammed back shut with force. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Then silence. By the time Keller and 2 more officers arrived, the hall was empty. No sign of the intruder, just a dropped crowbar and a trail of blood leading down the stairwell. The apartment was in chaos. Jamal's mom was shaken. Jamal was trying to stay composed, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Keller paced the room. "They didn't just come for a robbery," he said. "They came for Duke." Jamal's voice was low. "Why?" Keller sat down. "Because he's proof." "Proof of what?" "Proof that someone broke protocol, that your uncle pulled strings to get Duke to you, that a civilian kid has a military asset the government never wanted in public hands." Jamal blinked. "But Duke saved lives." Keller nodded. "And that's exactly what scares them." By the next morning, news had spread again. But this time, it wasn't admiration. It was fear. Headlines started popping up. Child kept retired military dog with no training license. Attack dog bites intruder. Who's liable? Was this K9 supposed to be decommissioned? Talk shows debated whether Jamal's mother should have allowed him to live with such a potentially dangerous animal. People who had once clapped for Duke now whispered behind doors. And worse, officials wanted Duke removed. They showed up with paperwork, polite voices, forced smiles. "Just a temporary evaluation," they said. "A safety protocol." Jamal stood in the doorway, blocking them. "No," he said. "It's for his safety too," they replied. "You're lying." Keller arrived just in time. He pulled the agents aside. "Unless you have a signed federal order and a warrant, you're not taking that dog." They didn't, so they left. But the damage was done. That night, Jamal sat beside Duke on the floor, eyes filled with tears. "They're gonna try again," he whispered. Duke nudged his hand gently. He wasn't afraid, but Jamal was. "I'm not losing you," he whispered. And then he made a choice. The next day, Jamal showed up at City Hall in a suit jacket that was too big and shoes that pinched. In front of a dozen microphones, flanked by his mother and Sergeant Keller, Jamal stood tall and told the world everything. He spoke about Tony, about the IED, about the letter, about Duke's training, about how Duke had saved a school full of kids and then stopped a home invasion, all without being commanded to attack. He ended with words that silenced the room. "My dog was trained to fight in wars, but he never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. He protects people. He protected me, and now I'm going to protect him." For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped, then more, and soon the room was on its feet. Within 24 hours, a petition was launched. "Let Duke stay." Over 150,000 people signed it within 3 days. Veterans spoke out. Military handlers came forward. Even members of Congress started asking questions about why a war hero was being treated like a liability. Jamal was invited to speak on national news, but he turned it down. "I didn't do this for TV," he told one reporter. "I did it for Duke." A week later, a letter arrived, a signed federal exemption. Duke was officially declared retired with full civilian honor. permanently transferred to the care of Jamal Rhodes. There would be no further review, no removals, no interference. Duke was finally safe. That night, for the first time in weeks, Jamal slept peacefully. Duke curled up beside his bed, breathing slow and even, and just before Jamal closed his eyes, he whispered one last thing into the quiet night. "We're gonna be okay now, soldier." And for once, he truly believed it. Sometimes, the people who go through the worst things in life are the ones who understand loyalty the most. Jamal never asked to be a hero. He never wanted attention, headlines, or microphones. All he wanted was to hold on to the one thing that reminded him of the man he loved most, his uncle, his mentor, his hero. That loyalty between Jamal and Duke had always been there. It just took the world a long time to catch up. In the end, it wasn't just about a dog who used to be in the special forces. It was about a boy who stood up when everyone else sat down. A boy who told the truth, even when grown-ups rolled their eyes. A boy who didn't give up, even when strangers came to his door at night, trying to take the last thing he had left from his uncle. And that boy, he didn't win with fists. He didn't fight with anger. He stood his ground with truth, with grace, with quiet strength. And that is rare, because in a world where loud voices often drown out the small ones, Jamal's whisper was the one that changed everything. In the weeks that followed, things slowly settled back to normal. At school, Jamal no longer sat alone at lunch. Teachers gave him nods of quiet respect. Some kids who used to tease him now sat beside him, asking questions, learning about Duke. He never bragged. He never gloated. He just smiled and said, "He's my best friend." That's all. And for Duke, civilian life finally felt peaceful. No more strangers trying to take him. No more patrols through trauma. Just morning walks. The smell of toast. A boy who understood him like no one else could. Jamal still played the cassette tape sometimes. He'd lie on the floor, Duke's head on his chest, and listen to Tony's voice telling stories from faraway places. Places that no longer scared him, because now Jamal had his own story. One that mattered. One that inspired people far beyond the fences of his neighborhood. And Sergeant Keller? He changed too. He started coming around more often. Not in uniform, not on patrol, just to check in, to ask Jamal how school was going, to bring a bag of treats for Duke. Sometimes, they'd sit on the stoop and talk for an hour about life, about what it means to be brave, about how the system doesn't always get it right. But sometimes, when people listen, it can change. Keller told Jamal something once, while Duke laid nearby, snoring softly in the sun. "You taught me something, kid. That trust doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears fur." A few months later, something beautiful happened. The city held a ceremony in the park, the same park where Keller once laughed in Jamal's face. But this time, there was no laughter, just silence, and then applause. A plaque was unveiled, a bronze plate with bold letters etched into stone. Duke, K-9 veteran hero protector, for his service in war and his loyalty in peace. Dedicated to the bond between soldiers and the ones who wait for them. And to Jamal Rhodes for reminding us all that real heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they come home on four legs. Jamal didn't cry. He just stood there, one hand resting gently on Duke's back, the other clutching the medal he wore around his neck now, close to his heart. The crowd stood in silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, because this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the start of a legacy, about a boy, about a dog, about a truth the world didn't want to hear until it had no choice but to listen. They say heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Some carry weapons, some carry wounds, and some just carry each other. Jamal and Duke, they carried each other through the fire and came out the other side not broken, but stronger than anyone expected. If you were moved by this story, don't leave without subscribing to Paws and Claws for more powerful true stories that prove the bond between humans and animals is stronger than anything.